Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're happy to have you here. And if you are still joining the webinar, we will be getting started in just a moment. But thank you for joining us today. Yep, see some folks joining. Fantastic. Yeah, if you want to, let us know where you're calling in from in the chat. See Matt, Ken, Jeff, JR. I know where JR is. He's with Nucleus. David.
San Diego. That's close.
Hey. Welcome, Michael, Megan, and Matt, and Ken. Thanks for joining today. I see that David is so excited about this webinar. He joined twice, which is really, really impressive. See, we have this will probably become more and more common here. I see we have an AI note taker. I guess AIs will start joining webinars for people instead of the actual people. Yeah, innovative stuff happening on the webinar today here. Welcome, Jeff and Katie, Muthu, Edward. Welcome, everybody. Let us know where you're from in the chat if you feel compelled to. But yeah, let's get started. It is 2:01, no time to delay. Welcome to our webinar today. There's a joint webinar between two fantastic technology partners, Nucleus and Cycode. And we're going to be talking today about bridging ASPM and vulnerability management for scalable application security. I'm joined by several co-hosts today. I'll be acting as moderator, but I would love to invite my co-panelists here to introduce themselves. Let's start with Jimmy. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Adam. Hey, everybody. Jimmy here. I'm a field CTO at Cycode, 20 plus years of experience being a developer, doing ops, DevOps, and security. Before Cycode, I been a practitioner for a long time in the space, right? Done a lot of work on the customer side, public, private sector, consulting solutions, advising startups. So now I'm here doing a little bit of everything. Today I'll be speaking on behalf of like a practitioner.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Jimmy. It's great to have that practitioner perspective, so appreciate that. And how about you, Prasad?
Thanks, Adam. I'm Prasad Raman. I lead partnerships here at Cycode. Work with our tech partners, service providers, cloud providers as well. We've had the privilege of working with Adam and Aaron and the rest of the Nucleus team for about a year now and delivering value to our mutual customers, and looking forward to telling you all about that today.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Prasad. And A2, would you please tell them your real name
Oh,
and a little
well,
about yourself?
yeah. I am Aaron Atarzada. I'm the field security engineer from Nucleus. I'm primarily responsible for everything technical on the pre-sale side. So it's as far as getting all of our customers onboarded during POCs, getting them integrated into the solution, working alongside Cycode to build that partnership and the seamless transition between the technologies. Based out in Los Angeles. It's a sunny day here and excited to be here. So thanks for
All
having me.
right. Thanks for joining us. And Adam Dudley with Nucleus, and I work closely with Prasad on the Cycode side to make sure that we're delivering a very valuable solution for our mutual customers. So with that, I wanted to mention before we jump into the content that we are very happy to take your questions during the conversation today. No need to hold them till the end. So please do drop those questions in the chat, or I think we have possibly have the Q&A feature as well, whichever works for you. Happy to field those questions as we go. So with that, let us get into it. Oh, there's our agenda for the day. So we just did the welcome and introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about how Nucleus and Cycode work together to deliver a more comprehensive security approach, and get more specific about the advantages that affect specific teams in a security organization. We're going to clear up some market confusion, get into application security visibility, and then even though you can ask your questions during the talk, we will reserve some time at the end for structured Q&A. So that's it. So how do we work together basically to break down application security barriers together? And Prasad, do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we look at modern organizations challenge around software development, I think we see a few things, at least from the Cycode perspective, is one, applications are becoming business critical, especially homegrown applications are becoming business critical. You look at everything from the software in automobiles to the software that runs, financial institutions, to even consumer facing or gaming applications. Software is having a bit of a renaissance here. I think that brings us to the first challenge here is as that scales and as software becomes more critical, securing those applications becomes vital. We've all, Adam's intro about AI as well. If you look at the volume of code increasing, the criticality of code increasing, it becomes even more important to secure those new apps. I know especially, we're in a new modern world of cloud. But at the same time, large enterprises still have a large legacy estate. So how do we make sure that we are securing applications as they're built today and making sure that organizations have the visibility to do that? And then the last thing, and I think this has been a problem in security for as long as I've been in the industry, is how do we break down silos between tools? I think that's something that this integration and partnership we've delivered to customers today, and we're trying to do more in the future. But how do we make our tools interoperable? How do we really define what Cycode is good at, what Nucleus is good at, and make sure that we build a joint solution to deliver value to our customers? I think those are some of the challenges we want to talk to you today about how we solve. And then, yeah, I'll throw it over to Adam and Jimmy as well, if there are any additional practitioner perspectives or any other insights from the field.
Sure. Something that comes up for me, Prasad, is with regards to, scale issues and cloud complexity, is that, not only is a platform like Cycode helping, the organization, the application organization to, basically find those vulnerabilities or those findings before, code goes out. But to do it at scale, you really have to have the ability to, know what success looks like. And I think that when you combine Cycode with Nucleus, which can provide a real baseline sort of perspective on risk at the management or the executive level, then you get that combination, which allows you to really make sure that you're delivering, software that's secure, but also doing that in the context of overall organizational risk.
The only thing I would add is, been worked on both sides. One of the challenges, right, when you think about enterprise vulnerability management in the era of lots of code across a lot of cloud, for both legacy and modern stack, is that fundamentally, right, everything that we know about for security practitioners, everything you know about vuln management best practices, you need to unlearn that, because that does not apply to modern app and cloud stack. So there's a lot of friction that comes between those two groups, the developers, AppSec folks versus the enterprise VM team. So I think that this marriage, this integration also solves that problem of ensure that there's integration. The tools, the technical integration allows the people and process integration so that the VM can focus on management enterprise vulnerabilities, right, which Nucleus is good at, whereas the ASPM, that's more close to the dev and AppSec folks, allow those two to have specific capabilities covering the call it the nuanced needs of security developers, essentially.
I may add a few things on Jimmy's point. We saw this mass migration, right, from on-prem to the cloud within the last 10-ish years, and it really picked up after COVID. And when Jimmy says unlearn everything, right? And Jimmy, if I may add on this, everyone is used to blade servers using, VMware, ESXi, deploying single stack applications from a monolith, right? We've now migrated to single EC2 instances with 7 different CSPM resources around that single EC2 instance. And nowadays, people want to containerize everything, right? So now we're going from one VM to hundreds of thousands of containers. So everything's getting more spread out. People are using more Lambda functions. People are using more ephemeral assets. Things are not alive for more than 15 minutes a lot of the times. So you are going from state to complete ephemeral. And that scalability of data and having to manage that scalability of data in a large enterprise organization is tough. So this is where this conversation ultimately will go into, is how Nucleus and Cycode marry that gap of dealing with both the AppSec findings, where people are they're still using monoliths, but on the deployment side, they may be deploying in completely ephemeral ways.
It's helpful context. Thanks, A2. Before we get more deep into that, let's talk a little bit about some of the market confusion when it comes to application security and RBVM. Prasad, do you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are several areas, and this is a little bit, a consequence of how quickly the market is evolving. But I think a few of the things we want to clarify today, and we'll elaborate on this in some subsequent slides, is when do you use an RBVM versus when do you need ASPM or an application security platform? And I think as the market has shifted, I think there are unclear boundaries between those security approaches. And us at Cycode and Nucleus, we have really clear perspectives on what value we deliver to customers and how we work well together. And we want to make sure that we leave the discussion today clarifying what our strengths are, what our gaps are, and how working together can actually help deliver a comprehensive solution. And you see that as well as you go down here of, when you look at container security, you have to have elements of deep AppSec visibility. You have to understand how those containers are deployed and operating in runtime. And I think those are things that we can elaborate a little bit on what that workflow looks like and how both of our tools address that. The last thing I'll comment on here is, one of the reasons for the confusion in the market is we have a lot of vendors trying to be all things to all people. And I think a little bit of the delineation between what ASPM is and what RBVM is, the confusion in that is caused by vendors trying to be both and trying to effectively deliver a substandard version of both these products. And what we really want to talk about today is what our focuses are, why it's really hard for each of us to do what the other one does, and talking about how using best of breed products together is actually the best outcome for the customer.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that I'm reminded of this past week when we were at RSA and we did a joint breakfast with a customer, and I thought the customer really illuminated the difference and the distinction in a really great way, which is that to them anyway, the implementation of Cycode helps them ensure their developers get the right information about security issues so they can fix it right the first time and avoid false positives. Whereas on the more holistic side, Nucleus gives them a way to talk about how the program is going and what success looks like, and using things like risk scores to, drive behavior change, drive what the teams focus on in terms of overall risk. So I found that description and distinction very helpful. All right, let's keep going. So go ahead.
Yeah, I can kick this. In terms of what we view our better together story is, and I know we've alluded to this in the first couple slides, but wanted to really lay out exactly who Cycode is on the left and who Nucleus is on the right. If we look on the first row, we are an industry-leading application security posture management platform. We have a comprehensive AppSec platform that we offer to customers. On the other hand, to put a label on who we are, Nucleus is an industry-leading RBVM. Going down the Cycode side for a second, some of the things that we do and we highlight in terms of our capabilities, we provide native scanners in multiple critical AppSec domains. we're actually able to run our own engines. We can inspect code. We can find in domains like SAST and SCA, we can find, code level vulnerabilities. We can find vulnerable dependencies. We do things like secret scanning. We can find hard-coded secrets in code and Jira tickets and everything else. But the scanners themselves are something that are a core focus and core part of our platform. And for us, we view that that is critical to actually providing sufficient AppSec context and insights into the SDLC and how applications are built in organizations. Things we don't do, and we're very clear on this, is we don't provide infrastructure layer context. We're incredibly focused on the application, how they're built, providing as much traceability back through the SDLC as we can, from when a line of code is written through how that application is constructed and how it's deployed. Where it's deployed and when it's deployed, that's something that that we don't have as much context into. I'll kind of throw it over to Adam to talk about the Nucleus column here, and then I know Jimmy and Aaron have a bunch of practitioner and field perspectives.
Sure. So our founders come from the public sector, and they were at a defense contractor before building Nucleus, and they came from that infrastructure side of things, and application security came much later for Nucleus. So they were working for the NSA, doing a lot of traditional vulnerability management, and so Nucleus was kind of born out of that environment. So it was never our intention to develop our own scanner. At the time, it was more of the infrastructure scanners that were giving them the challenges they were having, which led them to create Nucleus. So they thought the market had enough scanners at the time, so they didn't focus on that. But yeah, so Nucleus is really focused on that holistic layer, and CISOs and security leaders tend to come to us, and usually the first thing they said is like, hey, I'm discovering vulnerabilities all over the organization, whether it's scanning application code or cloud infrastructure, or even OT if they're in a healthcare manufacturing environment. And they tell us, hey, I just want to get all that information in one place, so that I can holistically report on risk and have that measuring stick to see how we're doing on our program and our different groupings of assets or products, or however they look at the taxonomy of the landscape in the organization. So really that's what we're focused on, is that top level risk perspective, and also allowing the organization, every different security team, to have a universal way to communicate about risk. Because as you can imagine, people on the dev team versus people on the cloud team versus people on the infrastructure team, they're going to communicate in very different ways about risk. And so in a sense, Nucleus can often be thought of as a communication tool and not just a security tool, because we help different parts of the organization speak to each other in the same language about risk from vulnerabilities in the organization. So that's another way to look at it.
And
Jim,
yeah,
go ahead, Jimmy.
some more colors. Obviously I've actually worked with the Nucleus in my past life, or similar solutions as well. So going back to the who are the primary users, right? Like I think Prasad said, yeah, we get it. Vendors consolidation always blur things, right? Just because there's a vendor does it all, or there's acquisition,
Sure.
doesn't really mean the people doing the job, they're not the same people. So for Nucleus, right, I think that my experience is that it's very operational, right? This is different. One is operations, one is development, one is production, primarily. One is very much development with production context. From a production perspective, I think Nucleus, one of your strengths, I remember, is the asset, right? Asset inventory, asset management. And I think about that is that you look at holistically the enterprise IT assets, right? Apps, infrastructure, however you slice and dice and groups it. But I think that when you zoom in on the application, especially modern application, which is very much comprises of, code, right? The left it goes. It's almost like when you dig deeper, it's almost like it's at some point you hit a black box. And I think the way Cycle does and ASPM is, right, without getting into scanners yet, is you can actually see through that black box. We can actually see not just code, source code, it's just what branch, right? What commit. When you look at even branches, commits, what SDLC stages, those are very important added context for software assets. So that's the additional visibility, even just from a asset inventory perspective. And then scanners, right? And I like to, I think there's a lot of security folks on the call. I like to use the SIM space as a lesson learned, right? So I think that one of the things that Cycle we believe, right, is that yeah, you do need a SIM as the aggregator, but what makes a SIM not a log management is the analytics. So
Yeah.
the same way that we put a lot of investment into our scanners, the quality of it, low false positives, that you cannot really turn a garbage into something that's usable by just aggregating a bunch of data. So that's especially true for software because we want to provide developer a seamless experience, right? Winning trust, don't give a bunch of noise fatigue. That's most common problem. So that's why the enrichment come from the quality. Um, the scanning that provides is that you're adding additional context, right? And I think that Matt talked about had a question around SCA, software composition analysis for open source. That's a great example. There could be an ingesting an SCA solution from whatever vendor. You can want to, you know, if you want to go be cheaper, you can get a OWASP dependency check, which is an open source SCA out there. But how do you know that? How do we do above and beyond of taking that and enrich it so that make it more actionable, prioritized? We're adding layers like explorability, like EPS scores, Kev, right? And then there's obviously reachability analysis that we have internally and maturity of exploits. Those are things that add to the baseline of a finding. So that's kind of how we do it. So that's the enrichment on our side, not just the software assets, but also the software security findings that we're adding more context. Again, have all that, goes close, integrate close to developers' workflow. So that will help developer fix things while the VM team, typically, that owns Nucleus, keeps track of that.
Hmm.
No, you hit it right on the head, Jimmy. That is, Jimmy, you're literally doing my talk track. This is perfect. This is why this entire partnership exists, right? Cycode's deep granular insights into the actual code finding itself at rest, and Nucleus's runtime context of being able to track where that finding is, how many EKS clusters it's on, how many of them are in production across how many total containers and everything. That's where these two marriages meet. So this is why I'm so excited about this conversation today, to clear up so much confusion. Go ahead, Adam.
No, it's a beautiful segue sort of into this region. But before we go any further, I saw a couple questions come up in the chat. I actually didn't get a notification on those, so sorry to the folks that put those in there. But yeah, so Ken asked, are the scanners standalone scanners or is it built into the app? And I think that is definitely a question for Cycode.
Yeah, I can take that one. And Ken, thanks
Yeah.
for the question. The scanners we have are standalone. So you can purchase those scanners from Cycode and deploy those against kind of whatever code you're looking at. Once we have those findings can be ingested into Nucleus to make sure they're prioritized and contextualized in terms of an organization's overall security program. So I think that really highlights kind of the different use cases here. I mean, if you're simply focused on application security and looking at getting really deep around those findings and correlating those across different AppSec domains and traceability back to source code, that's definitely Cycode's bread and butter. When you're looking at doing that in terms of overall enterprise-wide risk management, that's something that our Nucleus integration helps enable.
Yeah, thanks, Prasad. I hope that answers your question. Ken, let us know. We got a question came in from Q&A. Which data is being used for prioritization? I feel like maybe I'll pass that over to A2 since they're talking about prioritization. Maybe they're talking about prioritization within Nucleus at the bigger scale. A2, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so this is again where the better together story comes in play, right?
Yeah.
Because you can have prioritization of a finding at rest. You can have prioritization of a finding with finding specific context, such as like EPSS or CISA-KEV. Um, but where this marriage comes in play is the prioritization with runtime context, right? How many clusters at runtime is it deployed on? How many of those clusters are actually publicly facing? How many of them have sensitive data or PII on them, right? So that I think of this as like a tree where you have the left side of the equation, which is the vulnerability, and then the right side of the equation, which is the asset to which that vulnerability is being deployed on. Those two married together outcome this risk score. And that risk score essentially saying, how risky is this vulnerability to our organization, right? So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, A2. And that was an anonymous question, so I can't name them, but hopefully that was good for you. Another question came in. Thanks for the participation, folks, from Jeff. He says, some of my dev teams are moving to low-code dev environments. What are the differences in risk, and how does Cycode address?
Yeah, Jimmy, is this something you're
Yeah,
able to?
and I heard low code, moving to low code. So to me, that's I think that just goes to the last question actually. So I think low code, right? I think low code is probably, that means in addition to obviously, building, delivering software at the application layer, you either or doing both, moving towards more of obviously doing more of a containerized environment, right? So probably infrastructure as code, I'm assuming, is your way to doing it. Maybe GitOps if you're more advanced. So that's actually good in a way that how the cycle provide and how I would say how that's a perfect actually marriage as well, right? So we look at from a infrastructure as code perspective, right? The infrastructure layer as in development. If you are practicing that GitOps like model where you're storing all your infrastructure deployment scripts and templates in your source code repository and deliver the same way as you commit them for infrastructure deployment, then it's perfect that we do that exactly, treat it the same way as we treat it for any source code for applications. So we will do, pull request, right? We can scan at the IDE level. We can look at infrastructure code. During your pull request, we can look at a scan as well with our native infrastructure code scanner. And then, we can even look at the Docker file, for example, for containers, right? So before even build a Docker image, we go as left as possible to help developers identify issues early. Obviously both from a vulnerability perspective for known bad image versions to misconfiguration of, things like, running root, those other things, permission-wise, IAM permissions. Um, so we do that early, right, before they commit to production. Now we obviously don't have the production context where the what Nucleus have, right? So this is where the Nucleus come in, that other side of the runtime context that AT was talking about earlier. So if we don't use that, then some people might say it's quite noisy because we don't know, developers don't want to know what's a theoretical issue versus what's an actual issue. So the enrichment comes from the fact that we know actually how it's deployed, how it's run. So, let's say you have a very good CNAPP or CSPM solution that can detect the toxic combination of a misconfiguration of either your workload or cloud services. Then that context help us tune the rules that can be implemented early in our IAC, infrastructure code security detection. So that's kind of how I see it, Cycode would do on that part.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jimmy. Hopefully that addresses that question. Got a lot of questions coming in, which is always great. This is a follow-up probably for A2. So anonymous attendee asks, beyond tying build time to runtime vulnerabilities in assets and risk scoring capabilities, what does Nucleus bring to the equation?
Yeah, good question. So I also don't want to just look over the runtime context, right? Because runtime context, not an easy thing to do when you're talking scalability across millions of assets. And one thing we're going to be talking about once we get into the next slide here is around something we call container workloads, which is tracking assets that die very quickly, right? And being able to add context to that. A few things that come off the mind here is with the vulnerability itself, there are 17 different threat intel feeds that are enriching that vulnerability out of the box. without any need of configuration. So when you talk about that risk scoring metric itself, there's over 300 different pivot points of prioritization that customers from all sectors can leverage to validate. Other things are things like top fixes, right? How many of my vulnerabilities across my entire stack can I remediate with the maximum amount of risk with the least amount of work, right? So being able to bundle up the actions so that you don't hand 10,000 tickets to your engineers and you're really just handing them two. So those are just some things.
A2, that's a famous source of organizational friction, is it not?
Right. Yeah, of course, of course. But if you are curious, again, feel free to reach out on email and connect, and more than happy to give a deep dive.
Thanks, A2. We got
Mhm.
another follow-up question for Cycode here. Ken also, thanks again for a question. How does Cycode marry up the issues found with those that are found by vuln management and dynamic web app testing?
Yeah, I mean, I can take this one, and then Jimmy, any context that would be great. One of the things we do at Cycode before we run any scans is we integrate with as many of the source code repos and CI/CD tools as possible. So we're really trying to understand how an application is constructed. So what lines of code went to build that application, what container images were built, what Docker files those deployed to, and how do we build an application from the ground up? What that enables us to do is when we get findings from other tools. So we don't have our own native DAS schema, but when we ingest any dynamic application testing results, we're able to take context that those external scans are giving us. So for example, if we know what endpoint that is scanning, or what Kubernetes ingress that's tied to, we're able to correlate the findings that we have as a result of the integration into the SDLC and the context that external scanner is giving us. So we're able to deduplicate a lot of things where maybe it's the same vulnerability that's found by a DAS and a SAS scan. We're able to correlate common attributes of those two vulnerabilities and able to deduplicate that and provide some of that functionality within Cycode. But the short answer to the question is we have so much context about how that application is built that we're able to correlate certain common characteristics.
Want to add, let's talk about money, cost. I think if you're a security leader, you probably think about, oh, how is that related to cost? So any runtime tool, right? So there's a obviously the left you go, obviously the benefit of looking at source code is that you can address things early, but you don't have the context of how it's run. So you need both sides. But when you look at a runtime finding, whether it's a DAST or anything, it's great that you know how it behaves. It's real, you get actual runtime context. It's more real. But the problem is that it costs a lot of time. Let's say a DAST, and I've done that before as a practitioner, to correlate a DAST finding, black box finding to where does it come from, which repository, which team, which app, which dev, which line of code. So this is where Cycle helps, is to call that root cause analysis, call that exposure path, to quickly, instead of wasting engineering hours asking people, we can illuminate that traceability all the way to the source code repository, to the developer, and typically that's where you can see the source code in the same repository. So that's, to precise point, it's really saving the time and cost. Get to remediation faster by figuring out who owns it.
Excellent. Thanks for the extra context, Jimmy. A2, did you want to spend a little time on this slide talking about one of your favorite topics, which is ephemeral assets?
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about this actually the other way around. So from right to left instead of left to right. So when you think of containers and you think of AMIs that are leveraging like auto scaling groups to deploy these assets, the longevity of these assets is they will die eventually, right? The whole point of using an auto scaling group is so that if you have low load for one day and then tomorrow you have extremely high load, you can just quite simply scale out the same VM over and over and over again. And eventually your scanners will scan those VMs, right? Because that's their job, is to scan those EC2 instances. Same thing goes with containers. Same thing goes with ECS. Same thing goes with Fargate. It's all the same thing, right? Eventually, your scanners at runtime will scan those assets. And so what ends up happening is you're left with in your scanner retention rules where you have assets that are alive or they're dead, and you don't know if they are alive or they're dead, and ultimately how to tie it back to a static asset, such as the manifest or the workload who's actually deploying those auto-scaled assets. So this is where container workloads comes in play. It's not so much just around containers, it's around anything ephemeral that can be spun up and spun down very quickly. It's the idea of tying it back to a static asset and continuously keeping a record of that asset throughout its entire lifetime, if it's one or if it scales up to 1,000, right? And this is where we start. We're migrating from the right hand side to the left hand side now. And this is where we start talking with our marriage between Nucleus and Cycode is how can Nucleus gain all of that runtime vulnerability information rather than give Cycode hundreds of thousands of containers, we can now give Cycode one finding with the commit. And that's where we go down to the registry and repo commit layer, and where Cycode takes that vulnerability instance, runs with it, and knows exactly who, where, what, how that finding was enacted and who to assign it to for remediation. And that's ultimately how this marriage plays out, is having all of that runtime context, moving it from the right-hand side all the way down to the left-hand side so that we don't send Cycode millions and millions of findings.
Just want to add, I know I can sense A2's excitement about containers. So am I, one of my hobbies. I want to add, it's great, right? I mean, you all know, like, I think containers are one good example of how we should think things differently. But another thing that's important to call it out, right? SOC, right? You know, how many SOC analysts knows how to triage and attack against container Kubernetes cluster? Probably not so much, right? So this is where what A2 said is important. Because you know, think about you know, obviously, yeah, you can have you know, tools that does you know, remediation or response to a running container, but you know, it's not patching anymore, right? It's how do we get to the source and you know, deploy a brand new one. But this is applying that what A2 said is how do we do that quickly once we find identify an attack, especially ephemeral assets. You know, you can attend, maybe you saw that there's attack, maybe that container is already shut down. So how do we ensure it doesn't happen again, right? So that workflow that A2 just said allows a quick response, brings SOC to the work to this group, and then quickly redeploy a new one from the source, right? When you correct from the source.
Yeah.
Great.
One more thing
Yeah, go ahead.
on this around tags and also base images. I think this is like the biggest needle in the haystack is like people create spin-offs of base images, right? And at the end of the day, what Jimmy was saying around tagging and ownership of maybe the person that's remediating the base image is going to be completely different than the person that's actually provisioning the spinoff of the base image. Like this is how large organizations work, right? Like you have a registry of base images and then every engineer can pull down that base image. But the scanner doesn't know that vulnerability instance if it's attributed to the base image or if it's attributed to the spinoff of the base image, right? And being able to tie it all the way back down to the commit that Cycode's visibility provides is crucial in large organizations and effective remediation. So you don't just create tickets to just a bunch of random people on accident.
Yeah, definitely want to avoid that. Doesn't make for a happy work environment for sure. So let's get to Matt's question here. So Matt asked, from a threat intel perspective, do you evaluate the provenance of contributors to various distros and libraries?
I think that's a question for us,
Mm-hmm.
but I can take it, Prasad. So great question, Matt. So I think goes on with SCA. So yeah, as you probably see that both Cycle and Nucleus have our own prioritization, right? And also we both have our own threat intel feeds, and I think it's a little different. I mean, this similar is different. When we get to that level, right? We start talking about upstream contributor of a open source library, for example. We talked about EPSS, talked about explainability, reachability. We do look at contributor and the health of a repository, upstream repository from open source project. So absolutely, right? So we have our own research team as well as we pull in intel around just the health frequency of the project, right? So health of the project, health of the repo. About how, and when was the last time somebody committed to this for most project, right? The brand reputation of the contributors, are they known to be good or bad, right? So absolutely, you're correct. So we take into those account. And those are actually directly affecting our SCA findings. So obviously we have our NETI FCA, uh, uh, but if we don't, right, if we're pulling from SCA from third party, we enrich with SCA with those additional filters and prioritization, so we can actually make the other findings better.
Matt, let us know if that answered your question. Seemed right on the, yeah, perfect. There was another question in the chat, the Q&A. Do your remediation
Yeah.
partners work in Nucleus or are the findings forwarded to a ticketing solution? Good question. So this is how this partnership was created. Again, we believe in empowerment. So you have full reign to hop into Nucleus, right? Engineers can hop into Nucleus if their heart desires, but a lot of the times engineers want that deep-rooted context, which is where our partnership with Cycode is so fruitful, is where they can hop straight into Cycode and have deep level commit information to the down to the exact code line that is vulnerable as a result of that vulnerability. But at the same time, sometimes people are using ServiceNow ITSM, right? Maybe it's just an infrastructure finding. Maybe it's Jira. So having all these at the same time without any of them stepping on each other's toes is crucial in an effective VM program.
That's great, A2. Thank you. Prasad, did you want to talk a little bit about this slide and just, go up a couple levels? We've been, down in the technical depths a little bit with our genius colleagues here. Do you want to talk at the business level, what kind of, value we're creating with this partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to some of the market challenges we saw at the beginning of there's more code and that code is becoming more and more critical. So I think when we think about alerts that we're finding, there are going to be more of them. It's more important to focus on the ones that matter. And I think the value we try to deliver to our customers is, can we tell you really quickly what are the problems you need to fix and what are the most important problems you need to fix and how do you solve them quickly? I think we at Cycode, we detect those problems, and from an AppSec standpoint, we provide a ton of context around which ones are most critical. I think when you look at domains beyond AppSec, or how do I contextualize that in terms of my larger cybersecurity program, that's where our partnership with Nucleus really helps with the noise reduction. If we look at coverage, I think that's one of the things we pride ourselves at Cycode is the breadth of our scanners and the number of different domains that we can provide insights on. So things like code level analysis with our SAST engine, we can do. There was a question around, open source dependencies, vulnerable dependencies to our SCA. We've got, beyond code level analysis itself, we have a bunch of CI/CD tools, both secrets detection, code leakage. This isn't supposed to be a time to focus on that, but the just highlighting the breadth of that coverage. And then, you look at faster remediation and resource savings. I think this is where the integration really helps organizations. Is how do I identify what are the most critical vulnerabilities? I'm getting issues from my vuln scanner, from my endpoint tools, from my firewall logs, external threat feeds, then also all this AppSec context from Cycode. How do I fix what matters? How do I know what matters? And how do I do that quickly? And as always, the more we can integrate with existing ticketing tools or auto remediation capabilities, the more time and money is saved. But this is what we're delivering for customers today. Really trying to give them that, deep AppSec expertise when they need it, being able to put that in context across their entire security program, and then help them with the workflows to actually take action and remediate those fixes. That's what we games deliver together to customers.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that, sorry, I have some noise in my environment. A2, do you want to take this?
Yes.
Like anything you want to add to what Prasad said?
I mean, he said it perfectly. If I'm being completely honest, he said it perfectly. I will say, going back to our last slide, is empowerment, right? We want to empower all teams of the organization with the least amount of friction. Okay. And like Cycode is, just like Jimmy said, is a largely developer driven tool where Nucleus is going to be from the IT perspective, like trickling a little bit into the AppSec side, but primarily from the IT perspective of managing the holistic risk, right? And whether your remediation teams are leveraging Jira or ServiceNow, reducing the amount of friction needed for tools to become empowered for remediation, and keeping the conversations open. Like that's to me, that's where a lot of these partnerships, and these customers that we work with, this is where they see the value of these two together.
Thank you, A2. And I think we're coming into the final stretch here. So I want to ask all of my co-panelists here, is there any final points or thoughts you want to put to the folks here that have joined us today?
Yeah, just a thought to mind, just speaking from experience, right? This could be a little bit of a controversial, but you know, what I, obviously one of the friction points we talked at the beginning, right, is when you have, and I get it, sometimes it's enterprise, organization challenges, right? Staffing and sources. When you have VM team running AppSec, I can tell you that from a practitioner perspective, it's a developer's nightmare when you have a VM team automating Jira tickets over there. So to me, a successful combination of ASPM plus RBVM, in this case, Cycode and Nucleus, is that essentially Cycode plus a AppSec team and developer, essentially it can keep um, VM team off the developer's back because all the hard stuff can be integrated so that they should never see and deal with the VM team with this combination, which is a great win, right? VM can focus on bigger enterprise risks. Developers can actually keep building, shipping their products without slowing down.
That's great. Is that the last word, gentlemen? We're going to let it end there. And I think it's been a fantastic webinar. And thanks so much for everyone who joined us and participated today and, chose to spend your morning and your afternoon with us. We know you have a lot of ways to spend your time. So thank you very much. And if you have further interest in Cycode or Nucleus, you can scan the QRs here real quick, or reach out to any of us. We're happy to help you. Thanks so much for your time today. Thanks, everyone.